What's the craziest family secret you have? Story 1. Well, back in the 1920s or something, my great-great-grandfather had a bit of money to spare and decided to buy some oil stock. Not a lot, but some. He happened to pick one that made it through the crash in the Great Depression and came out on the other side of World War II with quite a lot of money for the time. In the 1980s, after he died, that money was put into a trust to pay for college for all the kids of my generation. For some reason, I guess these sorts of trusts have to have some kind of end date or trigger to dissolve them so they do not just carry on forever. Since I was the youngest person of my generation born when it was put together, they decided to set it up so I am the trigger. When I die, my siblings and cousins will inherit about $500,000 each. Under no circumstances could I ever get access to that money, although I did end up using a few thousand for college. But since I had a job and a 90% full-ride scholarship, it was really just a few thousand. I just have it hanging over my head as a motive for all my family to kill me, or at least hope for my death. It is a little unnerving when I think about it, so I try not to. Story 2. My grandfather was a drug dealer in the late 1940s and early 1950s. My mother finally admitted to me last year, not only that he did it, but that he would make the whole family go with him. He frequented truck stops to sell and to hook up with women, even while his kids were in the car. When he was 37, he had a massive stroke on the back steps of his house. His suitcase was packed, and he was abandoning his wife and 5 kids to go live with a girlfriend. And instead, my grandmother got stuck caring for a bedridden man who had stepped out on her. She tried to divorce him, but she would have had to pay for his care. Her job at a nursing home did not pay well enough for that, so he stayed. After a while, he regained mobility, which meant he could harm all the granddaughters. My first memory ever is of him putting his hand down the front of my pants. Everything came out in the open after my grandmother died in 2008. He died in 1996. My grandmother admitted not long before she died that she knew what he was doing to the granddaughters. To me, that just meant she was a monster too. Story 3. My great-uncle was probably a spy of some kind. He was a pretty tough man, intelligent, and had an exemplary record in World War II, but my parents were always suspicious about his job. He supposedly worked for the United States Geological Survey, but among other things, he traveled for work a lot for someone who worked for the Department of the Interior. I am not aware of the other reasons they had for their suspicions when he was alive, but my father was a detective, so I figure he knew what he was talking about. It seems their suspicions were valid. After he died, they went through his house and belongings, and his passport had no stamps, despite the fact that he was often overseas. He had secret compartments in his house, including a few for guns, and he was hardly the paranoid type. There was other strange stuff too that I cannot quite remember. I have no idea what he really did for his job, and I do not think we will ever know. He was a really interesting guy, though, and everyone misses him. Story 4. My great-grandfather supposedly killed a man. I might have shared this somewhere else before, so calling it a secret is a bit of a stretch. The story goes that my grandmother's sister, who was 5 at the time, went missing from the front step of the house and was taken and assaulted by a neighbor boy. When she was found and he was quickly identified by witnesses, he was imprisoned down in London, we are further north, for around 6 or 7 years. It is not clearly recalled. My grandmother and the rest of the family who told the story are now dead, whether the girl died soon after being found or some years later, but she did die as a result of what happened. The man got out of prison and was sent to live in a halfway house but never made it there. He was pulled out of the Thames 2 weeks later. He was dead and apparently showed signs of having been restrained and beaten. My great-grandfather had never taken a day off work except for those 2 weeks when his daughter's attacker was missing. The police knew. They came around and asked if he had taken 2 weeks off work, and he said yes. That was it. They left it at that. This was the 1920s. I have searched online but cannot find much about it, and a lot of the older buildings were destroyed during World War II, so it is possible the records were lost. Story 5. When I was 10 years old, my family, 3 sisters, my mother and my stepfather, and I lived with another family, a single mother and her 3 young boys, in a rundown apartment above a gas station in rural Maine. My mother has never been what society would call stable and always thrived on being the victim in any situation, just for the attention. Of the three boys, one was a special needs child who was very difficult to manage. While the rest of us went to school or work, my mother would stay home with that boy, who was about 3 or 4 years old. One day I came home from school and saw several ambulances and police cars in front of the gas station. I did not think much of it at first because of the area we lived in, until I saw my mother surrounded by 4 police officers. I was told to go to a friend's house for the night, so I did. Later I found out that the boy had died while in her care. The official ruling was sudden infant death syndrome, but for a while they suspected my mother of smothering him. This was the 1980s and police work was not as advanced as it is now, but deep down, I know she did it. Story 6. My brother got connected with a man through his friends to sell handheld devices that had supposedly fallen off the back of a truck during the peak of their popularity. For a couple of years, my brother and 2 of his friends sold them and made a lot of money. That explains where many of my nice things as a kid came from. My brother would randomly show up at my house with new hockey jerseys, hockey tickets, a new television, and he seemed to have a different car every couple of months. My parents knew what was going on, but I was too young to understand. 2 years ago, he and I got drunk, and he told me the full details of those years in the early 2000s. Apparently, during that time, he made over $500,000 from selling the stolen products. Story 7. It is not really a secret, but we are not supposed to talk about it. My cousin Becca, who was 10, told her counselor that her 17-year-old brother Donald had hurt her. The police came and interrogated Donald for 10 hours without telling him why or what he was being accused of, and they coerced a sloppy confession out of him. Fast forward to the middle of the trial, and Becca finally admitted that she made the whole story up. The family wanted a medical examination to confirm it, but the idea was rejected. My cousin Donald is now registered in New York because of that false accusation. A year later, my grandmother and my aunt, who is Becca's mother, were running a daycare under their home. It was one of the best in the city. One day, my grandmother left her computer unattended while preparing snacks for the kids, and Becca got on the computer and pulled up inappropriate content. The next day, Becca told her counselor that my grandmother watched that kind of material while caring for the children. My grandmother and aunt lost both their business and their home because of it. Story 8. On my grandfather's deathbed, my family found out that he had a daughter younger than me, meaning I am older than my own aunt. My cousin, who was about 19 or 20, was about to get married until she went to the old country to visit her older sister, who was around 28, and her niece. She ended up having an affair with her sister's partner, which caused chaos throughout the family back home. Her parents made her tell her fiancé, and the marriage was canceled. She was grounded for 2 years, literally confined to the house or thrown out onto the street, and even pulled out of college for what she had done. My mother once had a secret abortion that only I know about. My ex-girlfriend also had one that my family does not know about. We are still friendly, even though she is now pregnant again with the next man's child. My uncle, who is a good man, secretly fathered a son with another woman while he and my aunt were separated. My older brother lost his virginity to our younger cousin when she visited the United States on vacation, after we had introduced her to my friend, who had a crush on her. He has not had any intimate relationship before or since. Story 9. This may seem mild compared to some of the darker stories involving violence and abuse, but here it is. When my father was in college in the 1970s, my grandfather went up to Alaska to work on building the pipeline. It was good money, and he sent most of it home to my grandmother so she could take care of the bills and pay for the kids' tuition. When my grandfather returned home, he discovered that she had gambled all of that money away playing bingo. He divorced my grandmother, and my father had to drop out of college and join the military. About 10 years later, they reconciled and remarried. This story was never exactly a family secret, more like family lore. But when my grandmother was on her deathbed, it was revealed that during those 10 years, she had married another man, drained him financially, and then came crawling back to my grandfather when she had no one else left to support her habit. Bingo can be a cruel addiction. Story 10. My father's side of the family is made up of 4 brothers, including my father and 1 sister. Everyone but my father has been involved in some level of criminal activity. I am not supposed to know any of this, but my aunt is banned from entering the United States and cannot board any plane that flies over U.S. soil. Whenever we stop at the border, our last name shows up on their computers, and they always have to search our car. My uncle, whom I met only after he served 20 years in a maximum security prison in British Columbia, is now back in jail after just 1 year of freedom for a double homicide. He had a disagreement with two older men in a parking lot, pulled out a shovel, and dealt with them. There is plenty more, but let's just say family gatherings are unsettling. For additional context, my grandfather is a large, balding man with a kind heart and a goatee. He has never raised his voice with any of us, and he is always trying to help when there is a problem. A few summers ago, he asked me to clean his attic, and while doing so, I found old photos of him as a biker. I had never seen pictures of him when he was younger, but there he was with slick black hair, a leather jacket, and the whole biker look. I knew it was him because part of his eagle tattoo was visible beneath his rolled-up sleeves. I thought the picture was cool and asked about his biker friends. He gave me a strange look I had never seen before, grabbed the photo from me, and said he did not want to talk about it. He also has a huge scar covering his entire back. I still do not know if the two things are related. Story 11. I am honestly glad this will probably stay buried. I created a throwaway account because I think my brother also uses Reddit. My family is a wild mix. I am the youngest of four, and we range from Democrat to Libertarian, from deeply religious to strongly atheist. Not long after my brother's wedding, my wife, who is terrible at keeping secrets, came to me with some shocking news. During her bachelorette party, my sister-in-law got drunk and told her something about my brother. He is a cross-dresser. He paints his nails, wears makeup, and goes out in public dressed in women's clothes. This would be an absolute bombshell if my intensely religious sisters ever found out. My mother would disown him, and my father would mock him. I am the only one he could confide in, but he is too ashamed even to do that. Honestly, I just feel bad for him. I want him to know that he can be whoever he wants to be, and that the rest of our family's judgment does not matter. He will never tell anyone, not even me. Luckily, he married a loving and supportive woman, aside from the part where she got drunk and revealed his secret. After talking to my wife about it, she said that no matter what choices my brother makes, his wife will stay with him because they are best friends and they love each other. At least he has that. If you are reading this, brother, I love you. Be yourself and forget anyone who cannot accept it. Story 12. My family is an absolute mess, so please try not to judge me for their actions. When I was in college, I lived at home to save money. My girlfriend at the time, let's call her Sally, got kicked out of her house by her unstable parents. Surprisingly, my parents allowed her to move into our spare room to help her out. About 6 months later, I found out my parents were getting a divorce because my father had cheated on my mother with Sally. I hate to admit it, but my father stole my girlfriend, and there are questions about whether there was overlap between her relationships with us. Naturally, I moved out and stopped speaking to my father. I thought it could not get any worse. About 6 months later, I received a wedding invitation from my father and Sally. She is more than 30 years younger than my father, who is nearly 60. Of course, I did not attend the wedding. I thought that was the end of it. But last week, I found out she is pregnant. That means my daughter will have an uncle or aunt who is 30 years younger than me and only 4 years younger than her. Welcome to my nightmare. Story 13. My sister has been arrested several times for producing illegal drugs since she was about 20. She has always been the biggest troublemaker in the family. We try to hide her situation, but sometimes I cannot resist telling the rather darkly funny story of how she got caught the last time. She went to pick up her kids from her ex-husband and had to put their toys in the trunk of her car. She loaded the kids, got in, and drove off. After a few miles on the highway, she heard sirens. Looking in the rearview mirror, she saw that her trunk was wide open. All of her drug-making equipment was clearly visible. She still has more than 15 years left on her sentence. Her kids live with their father now, and they are doing well. I like to joke about it sometimes, but the truth is, it breaks my heart every time I think about it. I just hope that when I move on and go to college, I do not end up like her. Story 14. I am using a throwaway account because this is a massive secret. My brother has been smuggling drugs on internal European flights for about 5 years. It started during his flight training in Spain. On his first trip, the instructor asked if he wanted to make some extra money, and my brother agreed. Their long training flight route passed close to the border between Africa and Spain, and since they were flying a small aircraft without tracking, they diverted to a small airfield in Africa. There, they picked up a large quantity of illegal substances. They bribed the local air traffic control staff with a share of the product and flew back into Spanish airspace. Their next stop was another small airfield, where they unloaded everything. They made an enormous amount of money, and this continued roughly once a week. Fast forward to now, he works for a commercial airline and still smuggles drugs, including Hero. He gets paid for each flight carrying these shipments. He does not handle them directly. He is simply told when they are on board so he can avoid random searches, which is easy since declaring an urgent technical or medical issue ensures immediate gate clearance without inspection. Everyone involved gets a cut and no one says a word. To make sure he was not lying, I spoke with some of his pilot friends, one at the same airline, one with a European carrier, and another with an international one. It turns out he was telling the truth. This is more common than people realize. The international pilot said he stopped because the risk is too high flying to the United States or other regions. But within Europe, it is low since many people take a share to stay quiet. If my brother is ever caught, he can simply claim ignorance, say something like, "What is that doing on my plane? How did it get there?" And he would likely avoid serious charges. The short-haul pilots I met also make extra money doing the same thing, usually about once a week. The trafficking goes both ways. Writing this out is overwhelming. It has been eating me alive for months. I want to tell my parents, but I know it would destroy my mother, and she is finally in a good place in life. I know it sounds unbelievable, but it is real, and it has messed me up badly knowing this and being powerless to stop it. When one of my friends found out, he was thrilled because it meant cheaper drugs for him. That disgusted me. If it were just marijuana or something mild, I could almost understand. But the fact that Hero is being shipped this way terrifies me. This is a huge, dangerous secret. Story 15. When I was 7 years old, my father took me from my mother in the middle of the night. He brought me to a small town in Utah where he kept me for 2 years. Most of that time I was locked in a dark room. I was fed scraps of food and beaten constantly, suffering several cracked and broken ribs. During the summer, he tied me to a pole by the neck and left me under the sun for 3 days straight, giving me only a spray of water from a hose once a day. When he finally brought me back inside, it was only to return me to that same dark, cold room. After about a year, my mother was allowed to call, but all she heard from me were my cries and choking sounds as my father beat and strangled me nearly to death. At 8 years old, he forced me to inhale drugs by pressing my face into a pile of white powder, leaving me no choice but to breathe it in. While I was under the influence, I was assaulted by 3 girls, 2 of whom were my half-sisters. The beatings and verbal abuse continued daily until I became completely numb to everything. After 2 years, the police finally found us. My mother had been searching relentlessly. One day at a truck stop, the police raided the place. A SWAT team surrounded my father and held him at gunpoint while I was rescued. My mother went through hell to get me back, and I am just grateful I survived. I wrote a detailed paper about everything that happened, but I have never made it public. Only a few people have read it. I am 18 now, and it has taken me years to begin healing, though I still remember almost everything. Story 16. I wish this was not going to be buried, but here it goes anyway. Many years ago, when I was 23, I married a widow who was as beautiful as could be. This widow had a grown-up daughter with red hair. My father fell in love with that daughter, and soon they were married as well. That made my father my son-in-law and changed my life completely. Now my daughter was my mother because she was my father's wife. To make things even more complicated, I soon became the father of a baby boy. My little boy was then my father's brother-in-law and therefore also my uncle, which made me very confused. Since he was my uncle, that also made him the brother of the widow's grown-up daughter, who was now my stepmother. My father's wife later had a son, which made him my grandchild, because he was my daughter's son. My wife had now become my mother's mother, which made me sad, because even though she was my wife, She was also my grandmother. If my wife is my grandmother, that makes me her grandchild. And every time I think about it, it nearly drives me insane. Because now, as the husband of my grandmother, I am my own grandfather. It sounds unbelievable, but it is true. I am my own grandfather. Story 17. My mother found out she was adopted at her father's funeral when she was 6 years old. She has no idea who her birth parents are. Her first major mental breakdown happened in her 20s. After using drugs, she jumped out of a window to escape from my grandmother, who she said was scaring her, and broke her spine. She did not have health insurance at the time, but a surgeon at the hospital performed the spinal fusion surgery for free. Fast forward exactly 25 years later, she now had 4 children and suffered another psychotic episode. One Wednesday while we were all at school, she believed the world was ending because of something she saw on television. So she set some laundry on fire to send a signal and waited for the fire department to rescue her. My grandmother came by, saw what was happening, and started screaming to save her. That terrified my mother again, so she ran straight through the flames toward a painting of Mary and Jesus on the wall. She survived with third-degree burns. There were other hospitalizations and episodes between those times, but these 2 were the most serious. I have never really shared this before. Despite her illness, which was misdiagnosed and untreated for years, my mother is a wonderful, loving, and selfless woman who has always done everything for her kids. She is intelligent, funny, unique, and deeply compassionate. It is hard when people ask what happened to her because of her visible scars, and it is a lot to explain. But when people truly get to know her, they realize it does not matter. She is a survivor, and she inspires me every day. Story 18. My uncle had a daughter when he was about 18 years old back in the 1970s. The child's mother took her away, and he never saw her again. Decades later, when her grandfather passed away, the daughter, now in her late 20s, found him. She told my uncle that the father of her baby was abusive, so he drove from Oregon to Southern California to help her move back to his home in Oregon. About 6 months later, my uncle and his wife began having serious marital problems and eventually divorced. It turned out that my uncle had been having an inappropriate relationship with his own daughter. He claimed that he had taken a DNA test proving she was not biologically his daughter. My aunt, suspicious, took a DNA sample herself and had it tested. It confirmed that she truly was his biological child. 10 years have now passed, and he still continues the relationship while denying the truth. My family has completely cut him off. It is a disturbing and unforgivable situation that none of us can even talk about without feeling sick. Story 19. There was at least one member of my family who tried to have me killed to cover up the physical and emotional abuse I suffered when I was younger. The ordeal broke me so deeply that I lost my sense of identity, but I tried to live a quiet life far away from everyone. Sadly, he eventually tracked me down. Instead of killing me, he caused the death of my girlfriend, who was completely innocent and got caught in the chaos. She was shot and killed. I spent years trying to find out exactly who was responsible, which was difficult because I struggled with memory issues. Thankfully, another family member believed me and helped me confront the one who had tried to end my life. When I finally faced him, I chose not to kill him. I forced him to confess everything he had done instead. The last I heard, he took his own life before any charges could be brought against him. My life has been marked by tragedy from the very beginning, and sometimes I feel like I was born into chaos itself. Story 20. This may sound unbelievable, and honestly, I could not believe it myself when I first heard it. In my culture, families are traditionally male-dominated, and a woman's place in her husband's family is often secured only after giving birth to a son. Because of this, many families keep having children until they finally have a boy. My aunt had already given birth to 2 daughters and was pregnant again. I had always thought she only had 1 daughter because the second girl had been given up for adoption to a relative living far away, something everyone in the family knew about. They said she had given away a daughter, but no one ever talked about it much. When she became pregnant for the 3rd time, the family desperately wanted a boy since they had already given away the last girl. Unfortunately for them, the 3rd baby was a girl as well. Yet to this day, I only have 1 girl cousin and 1 boy cousin from that aunt, and there was never a 4th pregnancy. What I later found out is disturbing. Before my uncle could even meet the newborn, certain people in the family arranged for my aunt's baby girl to be secretly swapped with a baby boy born the same day at the same hospital. They paid off a poor farming couple to exchange their son for my aunt's daughter. I do not know exactly how they managed it or why the hospital allowed it to happen, but where I come from, money can buy silence, and it was even easier back then. To this day, I do not know exactly who was involved, but I was told by my mother, and she said only a few on my aunt's side of the family know. My uncle and both of my cousins, the biological daughter who was given away, and the boy who was brought home instead, have no idea. And after all these years, that secret still haunts me. Story 21. My friend's mother, let's call her Mary, grew up with horrifying secrets, literally hidden in her closet. When Mary was a child, she came home from school one day, went to hang up her coat and found a dead woman inside the closet. Her mother immediately slammed the door shut and acted as though nothing had happened. Years later, after many therapy sessions, Mary pieced together the truth. Her father had been having an affair with another married woman. Mary's mother had long suspected it, and one day the mistress showed up at their home. No one knows exactly why. A confrontation broke out between the two women, and Mary's mother stabbed the mistress to death. She panicked and hid the body in the closet, the same one her daughter later opened. When Mary's father returned home from work, his wife confessed everything. But the nightmare did not end there. Later that evening, the mistress's husband, suspecting she was with her lover, came knocking at their door. Mary's father got into a fight with him, and in the struggle killed him as well. Both husband and wife were now dead, and Mary's parents decided to bury the bodies in their backyard. The police eventually suspected them and dug up the property, but they found nothing. The bodies had likely been moved. The disappearances were widely reported in newspapers at the time, and although Mary's parents denied everything until their deaths 15 to 20 years ago, Mary never forgot what she saw that day. The trauma stayed with her for life. Story 22. There is something deeply wrong with my Uncle E. He was deprived of oxygen at birth, which caused severe mental and developmental problems. As a child, he assaulted his younger brother, my Uncle V, repeatedly. When he became an adult, he assaulted another woman. To escape facing charges, he joined the military and was deployed overseas. I have seen wedding photos of him, but no one in the family ever talks about who the woman was or what became of her. I always wonder what kind of person would marry someone like that. My grandmother, their mother, was also a victim of horrific abuse. She was assaulted repeatedly by her own father when she was growing up, something that only came to light when she was dying from cancer. At that time, my mother was trying to have Uncle V imprisoned for what he did to me. My grandmother begged her not to press charges, saying, "If I could keep the family secret, so can you." Uncle V was always her favorite child. She resented her daughters, my mother and aunt, and protected him no matter what. Uncle V likely abused his own children as well, but they were too young to remember. They hate me for being the one who put their father in jail. On another side of my family, my husband had a son with a woman in Germany before we met. Her parents forbade her from seeing him, so my husband has only seen his son twice. We pay support regularly, but our children are still too young to understand. I will tell them everything when they are older. Story 23. I know this will probably get buried, but I recently found out something that completely changed the way I see my family. In 1972, before she met my father or had me, my mother had an affair with a married man and became pregnant. She decided to give the baby up for adoption, and just a few days after he was born, she handed him over to his new parents. She never saw him again. She told me this only a couple of weeks ago. I am 33 now because that son, the brother I never knew existed, has been searching for her for 20 years and finally found her on social media. I grew up believing I was an only child, and this revelation completely shook me. On one hand, I wish she had told me sooner, but on the other, I suddenly have an older brother. I have not spoken to him yet because she wants me to wait and take things slowly. She also asked me not to tell anyone yet, but I have told a few close friends, and now, here I am writing this. It may not sound as shocking as some other stories, but it has truly turned my world upside down. Story 24. This might never be seen, but here goes. My grandmother's sister's husband was murdered by my great-grandfather and my grandmother's brother. My grandmother's sister had married a violent man who frequently beat her, and at one point he nearly killed her. Back then, divorce in a small town meant public shame and being shunned by the community. So my great-grandfather and great-uncle took him hunting one day and shot him in the face. They called it a hunting accident, and my grandmother's sister became a respectable widow. My grandfather, on the other hand, used to run moonshine during his time in the Navy and made great money for about 4 years. He hid the alcohol in one of his car's gas tanks and wore his Navy uniform to throw off suspicion. Once, when the police caught on, he fled and rolled the car, but managed to escape and was never caught. My grandfather was wild, charming, and hated preachers with a passion. My grandmother's first husband, whom she married at 15, was actually a preacher, and it turned out he had multiple wives in different towns. That probably explains my grandfather's hatred toward preachers. Everyone from that time is long gone now, but those secrets still linger in the family's shadow. Story 25. 2 of my aunts were assaulted by 2 of my uncles and by my grandmother's brother, my now deceased great-uncle, for years throughout their childhood. My grandparents supposedly knew, but did nothing to stop it. Now one of those aunts is 37 and has been struggling with addiction since she was 14. She once told her 16-year-old daughter that she had 12 abortions and almost aborted her too. She constantly blames the uncles and my grandparents for everything wrong in her life, saying she would not be an addict if not for what happened. She frequently manipulates my grandparents for drug money, using that trauma as leverage. The other aunt has been in one abusive relationship after another and mostly blames the addicted aunt. I do not know if they ever hurt my mother, but once while drunk, she told me that she and her brother were intimate in their 20s. I do not even know why, maybe because they were both lost in addiction and dysfunction. Honestly, the whole family is broken beyond repair. I could name more disturbing secrets, but there is no point. Some families are simply too damaged to ever recover. Story 26. When I was about 8 years old, my parents had already been divorced for a while, and my mother was struggling with depression. One day my sister, who was around 14, and I came home from school to a silent house. We called out for our mom, but there was no answer. We went to her room, and the door was locked. We knocked again and again, but she didn't respond. My sister began to panic because she knew what might have happened, though I was too young to understand. She started yelling and banging on the door until it finally gave way. I will never forget what I saw. My mom was lying unconscious on the floor, surrounded by pills of every color scattered everywhere. Even though I didn't fully comprehend what was happening, I knew something was terribly wrong. My sister screamed and tried to wake her up, and I began crying out of fear. She quickly called our grandmother, who then called the police and rushed to our house. My grandmother took me away when she arrived and sent me out with my older brother, who was about 19 at the time. He took me for ice cream, and I remember him quietly saying that Mom was going to be fine. The doctors pumped her stomach at the hospital and she survived. I remember visiting her there. When she saw me, she broke down crying and kept saying she was sorry. I didn't understand why she was apologizing, but seeing her cry made me cry too. A few years later, she had another breakdown and was sent to a rehabilitation center for treatment. Despite those dark moments, she has been an incredible mother, loving, selfless, and strong. We never told anyone else about those 2 incidents. Even today, much of the family has no idea. But she fought her way back from the edge and gave everything she had for us, and I owe everything I am to her. Story 27. It might not sound dramatic, but my family's very existence is a secret. My paternal grandfather left my dad, his sister, and their mother to start a completely new family. When my grandfather passed away about 1.5 years ago, there was no mention of us in his obituary. We only found out about his death because my dad's mother passed away around the same time, and other relatives mentioned it. When my sister tried to post a message in the online memorial guest book, it was deleted or never approved. It was surreal reading all those comments about what a wonderful father and grandfather he was. I don't hold resentment anymore. I barely knew him except for the stories. He was a World War II sergeant who fought on the beaches during D-Day. Everyone goes through pain and makes mistakes, and maybe he was a good man in the end. I just wish our side of the family hadn't been erased from his story. Story 28. This is a difficult one to tell. My mother died when I was 10 years old. My grandmother didn't tell anyone for several days and immediately emptied out everything from my mother's home except the paint on the walls. She produced a will that made her the sole inheritor. I asked for a few small sentimental items, things that reminded me of my mom, but she never sent them. When I called again, she told me I was no longer her granddaughter. My mother's remains were cremated and scattered at sea, and I have always suspected my grandmother forged that will. My mother had 2 daughters, and making a will like that would have been completely out of character for her. My older half-sister had gone to live with her father in the 1970s after refusing to believe my mom about a molestation. My mom later lost custody of me in the 1980s and was allowed only limited visits, eventually just 4 weekends a year. She used to complain about my father not paying her enough, yet when she died, she owned 2 rental properties despite never having a job. A tenant killed her, but was acquitted on the grounds of self-defense. She was 40. I later found out she had manipulated my father into paying $1,000 plus all expenses for each visit. Now, as a parent myself, I look at my 6-year-old son and wonder how much he will ever understand. He knows I had a different mother than his grandmother because she didn't know how to take care of me, but he asks questions constantly. He has special needs and a mind that never stops, and I struggle to know how or when to tell him about the chaos that shaped my childhood. All I know is that I want to protect him from ever seeing the kind of pain I saw before I was even 6 years old. Story 29. 13 years ago, when I was 7, my mom and I were out shopping. I don't remember which store it was, but I remember that I suddenly had to use the bathroom badly. My mom took me to the restroom and I went in, just a single-room one with a lock. I forgot to lock the door. As I was finishing up, some man walked in with a strange grin on his face. Before I could react, my mom burst in behind him and hit him hard with something heavy still. Not sure what it was. Maybe a sugar shaker from the cafe area. The sound it made was awful. The man fell, hit his head on the toilet, and blood poured out instantly. Within seconds, the place was chaos, employees yelling, sirens wailing, police and paramedics arriving. The man's caretaker was outside hysterical. It turned out he had an intellectual disability and had wandered off from the store next door. Despite everyone's efforts, he died on the way to the hospital. My mom was arrested and later convicted of negligent manslaughter. She got 12 years in prison, and I went into foster care. About 8 months later, a nun named Sister Mary Edwards told me we were going to visit my mom. It was strange because we had never done that before. When we arrived, she was in the medical unit of the prison. She had been stabbed earlier that day in some kind of gang fight. She could barely breathe but wanted to talk to me. They let me see her, and it felt like a movie. The heavy air, the guards, the machines beeping. She pulled me close and whispered 2 things I will never forget. I was paid to kill that man. It was never supposed to happen like that, and I love telling stories that never really happen. I left that room a different person. That moment shaped the path that led me to where I am now, a criminal defense lawyer. Story 30. This may sound wild, but it's true. The only reason my immediate family has no Nazi ties is because of some twisted, taming of the shrew-style parenting by my great-great-grandparents. My great-grandmother fell deeply in love with an aristocrat, wealthy, educated, charming, and devoted to her. It should have been a perfect match. But her parents had a rule that the younger daughter could not marry before the older one, so they forced him to marry her sister instead. Heartbroken, my great-grandmother rebelled and married a police officer from Frankfurt, an uneducated man of modest means. Her family disowned her completely. Life with him was far from perfect, but she found strength in her independence. As the political climate in Germany darkened and Adolf Hitler rose to power, she begged her husband to move to America. He refused. So while he was at work one day, she sold everything except 1 chair and left 4 tickets to America sitting on it. She took her daughters and sailed for the United States. When her husband eventually followed, he refused to learn English and ended up working as a janitor at a high school. She, on the other hand, was unstoppable. She bought property, became a landlord, lost it all, and rebuilt herself again as a booking agent for dancers, running a strip and gin joint. My current family would be mortified if they knew, but I think she was incredible, a strong, fearless woman who made her own way when the world was against her. She never spoke to her family in Germany again. I only learned this after bringing my grandmother back to Germany one year and giving her a few beers. Apparently, truth flows easily with Pilsner. Story 31. I am not sure if this counts as a secret, but here it is. My dad's best friend, someone I always looked up to and thought of as a second father, served in the 22nd Regiment for 9 years. When I was a kid, I thought it was awesome having this tough, quiet guy around who had been in the Army. When I was about 14 or 15, we were in the garden shooting targets with an air rifle. He casually shot the end off a cigarette at 70 meters, shortening it with every shot. I finally asked what exactly he had done in the military. He told me bluntly and then shared stories that were horrifying, things no person should ever have to experience. Years later, I met a man named Jude, a park keeper who became a good friend. He had been a child soldier in Africa before being rescued and brought to the United Kingdom by a charity. As a teenager, I might not have believed either of their stories if not for one chilling detail. They both told me the same story, from opposite sides. My dad's friend had served in the same region and at the same time as Jude. I have never told either of them about the other. There is a very real possibility that two of the people I care about most once faced each other on opposite ends of a battlefield. Story 32. It is not exactly a secret anymore, but it still feels strange to think about. When I was 9, I was in the process of being adopted into a new family. I had an older brother who was 15 and a sister who was 17. We finalized everything and signed the paperwork when I turned 10. That first Christmas together was terrible. Nobody spoke much, the atmosphere was tense, and I remember thinking that I must have done something wrong. My new dad was always working, and we never really connected. Around that time, my new mom began reading a book with me about homosexuality, what it meant, why it was normal, and how it was okay to be different. I did not understand why we were reading it. Later, I stumbled across an email she had written to my grandmother about how hard things had been, but that she hoped there would be a silver lining soon. A few months later, my parents finally sat me down and told me the truth. My dad was gay. I later learned that he had known even before my adoption, but they never told me. My siblings had found out right before Christmas, which explained why that holiday felt so awkward. 13 years have passed since then, and I still love all of them, my mom, my dad, and both of my stepdads. We might not be a conventional family, but we are a good one. Story 33. My mother told me this story during a conversation about religion. Our family used to be Catholic until my great-great-grandfather exposed a scam run by the church in his village. When he was a young boy in the Philippines, he served as a deacon or assistant at a small mission. There was a large statue of the Virgin Mary there, beautiful but hollow, with a hidden compartment beneath it. When the church needed to raise money, the priest would have my great-great-grandfather climb inside the statue and pour water down the inside of its face, making it appear as though the Virgin Mary was crying. The priest would then tell the congregation that she wept because they were not donating enough or because the church was struggling financially. The tears would move people to give more. Eventually, my family discovered what was really happening. Outraged by the deception, they left the Catholic Church and never went back. Story 34. My family has a long history of alcoholism, illegitimate children, and holding grudges so deep that if you upset the wrong person, you are erased from existence. I have a half-sister who was conceived when my dad had a brief fling in a restroom. I have an aunt I have never met because she angered someone in the family and has been cut off ever since. There is also a cousin whose name is forbidden to be spoken. Mentioning him is enough to cause chaos. My dad denies my half-sister exists, which is ironic because, at my brother's funeral, he unknowingly met her, her husband, and his only biological grandchildren, and he liked them. I have tried to convince him to accept her, but the subject has become so taboo that it feels pointless now. She is happy, he is happy, and life goes on. There are rumors of another brother living in the southeast of the United Kingdom, and possibly a sister in France. My father was quite the ladies' man in his day. My paternal grandfather was an Irish immigrant with a terrible temper and a love for alcohol. He used to beat my father, uncle, and grandmother viciously, but never laid a hand on his daughters. When my uncle was 16, he finally stood up to him and gave him a beating so severe that it ended the violence once and for all. After that day, my grandfather calmed down, but the damage he caused to the family never really faded. Story 35. Both of my uncles were extremely close, almost inseparable. One of them started having a rough time. He was facing possible jail time and had to get his foot amputated because of diabetes. A couple of summers ago, they had a huge fight, and one of them said he was tired of everything and said goodbye. A month went by without a word from him, no calls, no visits, no one had seen him. Finally, my other uncle stepped forward, saying he was worried because of their fight. My mom and the police went over and broke down the door, only to find him dead. He had been sitting there for a month in 100-degree weather with no air conditioning. My grandparents chose not to have an autopsy done and decided to believe he had accidentally overdosed on his pain medication or that it interacted badly with his insulin. But my mom secretly went behind their backs to find out the truth. The report showed that he had 10 times the lethal dose of pain medication in his system drugs he didn't even have access to, but my surviving uncle did. Only my mom and I know this, and we've never told a soul. My surviving uncle carries a visible guilt that speaks volumes, but he's never admitted to anything. Story 36. My grandfather used to tell me stories that were equal parts secret and unbelievable. Once, while we were fishing, he told me about the night he was stopped by a cop in a mostly white part of Iowa back in the 1960s. He kept a gun under the seat for protection. The cop started giving him a hard time, and when the officer went back to his patrol car, my grandfather cocked the gun, ready for whatever came next. When the cop returned and saw the weapon, he immediately backed off and left. Another time, while serving as a chaplain at the Iowa State Penitentiary during the Watts riots, an inmate threatened him, saying, "Wouldn't it be a shame if something happened to your family, chaplain?" My grandfather replied calmly, "If anything happens to my family, what happened in Watts will be nothing compared to what happens here." He also served as a military medical examiner in the 1950s and discovered that newborns were dying on base because the chemicals used to treat the water were toxic. He even assisted with early nuclear fission research at the University of Chicago. A small mention of his work can still be found in some obscure records. When he passed, we found a hidden stash of firearms, both military and hunting rifles, locked away in an old truck chest. There was also a pen-like object with a yellow capsule and a small gun, which my uncle said could launch gas rounds. No one ever figured out how he got his hands on such things. He lived a mysterious life, and even in death, he left behind more questions than answers. Story 37. I have an extra brother that neither my siblings nor my mother know about. Years ago, my dad confessed to me that he got his friend's girlfriend pregnant while the man was out of town. When she found out, they agreed to keep it secret forever. She married her boyfriend, and shortly after, my dad met and married my mom. My dad even gave me the name of that secret child, my half-brother. I looked him up online, and he looks exactly like my dad. The resemblance is uncanny, but I'll never tell anyone. What good would it do? This man doesn't deserve to have his entire life shattered by a secret he never asked for. He doesn't need to know that his mother cheated or that the man who raised him isn't biologically his father. And if his dad found out now, it could destroy a lifetime of happiness. Some truths are too cruel to reveal, and this one will die with me. Story 38. My great-grandmother immigrated to New York from Austria when she was 17. No one really knows what drove her to leave. Family stories only say she had a bad home life. When she arrived, she got a job tending bar to survive, which, according to the gossip of the time, was almost synonymous with prostitution for women in the 1800s. My grandmother later struggled with severe bipolar disorder and was dying of colon cancer during the 1970s. She tried to take her life several times. My father, still a teenager then, would sometimes come home from school to see ambulances parked outside and be told to go spend time with friends. To this day, he thinks she was trying to be noble and not a burden, but the truth is that she was deeply mentally ill. When she eventually passed, my grandfather remarried in less than a year. His new wife never got along with my dad, so by the time he was 17, he ran away and became a deadhead. It took him decades to straighten his life out. My grandfather disowned him completely and they never reconciled. I never met my grandfather, and no one told me when he died in 2009. It's sad because as much of a hard man as he was, he had lived through tragedy. His older brother died in a hit and run when he was just a kid, and he carried that pain forever. He served in World War II and probably had incredible stories to tell, but none of us will ever know them. Story 39. My grandparents are divorced, and my grandmother is a severe hoarder, the kind you see on those reality shows. She lives far away, so every summer my mom drives up to help clean her house. During one of those visits, while sorting through piles of old mail, my mom found a letter addressed to my grandpa. It looked like it had been sitting there for months. She asked my grandma about it, and my grandma said, "Well, he doesn't live here anymore, and it's not my mail, so I never opened it." My mom, curious, opened it privately later. Inside was a letter from a man claiming to be my grandpa's son from before he married my grandma. He wrote that he had spent years trying to find him, but had only managed to get their old address. My mom didn't tell my grandma, but decided to confront my grandpa. He denied everything. Still, she wrote back to the man, and since then, they've exchanged emails for years. We're nearly certain he's my mom's half-brother, which means I apparently have an uncle, an aunt by marriage, and a bunch of cousins I've never met or even known existed. Story 40. My Uncle C is probably married to his half-sister. Back when he was in the Navy stationed in Charleston, he met a woman named N. She had a 5-month-old daughter, and they both had 6-year-old sons from previous relationships. They fell in love fast. Within 6 months, they were married, and he brought her home to meet the family. During that visit, N mentioned that she was originally from our hometown. My grandmother casually asked who her parents were, and when N said her mother's name, my grandmother nearly fainted. It turned out that Grandma's first husband, an abusive, cheating man who had molested my mother, had carried on a long affair with N's mother. Both N and her brother D were born during that affair, and D even looked a lot like my Uncle C. Once my uncle learned the truth, he packed up his new wife, moved back to Charleston, and cut off all contact with the family. 20 years later, they're still together. He had a vasectomy and adopted her daughter, and the two of them are probably the happiest and most loving couple I've ever met. They've chosen not to know whether they are truly related, and honestly, I can't blame them. Story 41. My great-grandfather was a cattle farmer in South America during the first half of the 20th century. He was an American, the son of a German banker, who had moved to Colombia after falling in love with the country. My grandmother used to tell me stories about him and their childhood home, especially about a mysterious, locked room filled with wires coming out from underneath the door. He had studied economics, German, and psychology at Cornell University and taught his children Morse code when they were very young. During World War II, he supposedly left Colombia to translate English to Spanish on an American base in Panama because he wanted to contribute to the war effort. But looking back, that story doesn't quite add up. When I was 8, my grandmother asked me and my uncle to go through an old chest that held some of his belongings. Inside were several letters addressed to him, one of which thanked him for the perilous risks he took to serve his country and save his fellow countrymen. No signature, no details. Whatever my great-grandfather was actually doing during the war, he took it to the grave. One thing's for sure, he definitely wasn't just translating English to Spanish. Story 42. My family never talks about anything emotional. Even when something serious happens, it's brushed off like nothing. So one morning, about a week before I left for college, my boyfriend and I were asleep at my parents' house when we woke to the sound of my mom screaming at my dad, completely hysterical. That alone terrified me because I had never heard her raise her voice like that. We stayed in the room for a while, unsure of what was happening, until I had to get ready for work. When I walked out, my mom called me into the living room. She was crying, something I had only seen once before, when she found out my brother was using coca. Through tears, she told me that I had an older brother my dad had kept secret from us born right after my parents got married. She went on to say that my dad had cheated on her multiple times and even insisted on naming me after one of his mistresses, though thankfully she refused. She also revealed that her childhood best friend had known about one of his affairs and never told her, which ended their friendship. I was in shock and just went back to my room to grab my boyfriend and leave. Later, I called my brothers and they confirmed everything. Apparently, this secret brother, around 39, now found out about us when his mother died and told him who his real father was. He and his wife contacted my oldest brother 6 years earlier, and he, along with my dad and other brother, decided to keep it hidden from my mom and me. My mom only found out when the secret brother's wife sent her a letter explaining everything. A week later, things were back to normal. My parents never divorced, no one talks about it, and we still pretend I don't have another brother. I'm 24 now, and I still don't know his name, just that he lives somewhere near Crockett Rodeo, California. Story 43. When my dad's oldest sister, who's now 57, was 17, she got pregnant. My grandmother forced her to give the baby up for adoption, not because she was too young to raise a child, but because my grandmother refused to have a Puerto Rican grandson. Yes, it's disgusting, I know. For decades, the entire family thought the baby didn't exist because my grandmother told everyone my aunt had miscarried. She even threatened to beat her if she ever told the truth. My aunt eventually buried the whole thing and moved on with her life. Then about 3 years ago, my cousin went to a firefighter's funeral and got talking to a guy who mentioned he'd been adopted in our city and that his birth mother's brother was a firefighter. My cousin realized that matched my dad's story and helped put them in contact. It turns out everything was true. My dad finally met his nephew, the child his mother had erased from the family history. Story 44. My mother is a brilliant woman but completely incapable of admitting she's wrong. In her world, she's never made a mistake. If you catch her contradicting herself, she insists you misheard her, took her words out of context, or twisted what she meant. And if none of that works, she just shuts down. As she's gotten older and age isn't being kind to her mind, she's started slipping more. So to hide it, she's wrapped her whole personality around sarcasm. She says absurd or wrong things on purpose and laughs them off like a joke so no one questions her. People outside the family think she's this witty, funny old lady, and she is. But underneath it, it's all a defense mechanism built from a lifelong need to never be wrong. It's exhausting sometimes, but we've learned to live with it. Despite all that, we love each other deeply. Story 45. 2 years ago, I was sitting in my room playing World of Warcraft when I got a call from my dad. That alone was strange. He was usually out in his little converted shed in the garden, gaming or working, and he rarely called me from there. When I answered, he was panting, crying, and barely able to speak. "I need help. Now. Please, don't get Mum," he said. My dad is the definition of stubborn, proud, stoic, and tough as nails, so hearing him like that terrified me. I ran downstairs, slipped past my mother, and sprinted to the shed. He was slumped in his chair, sweating, shaking, and most shocking of all, had a needle in his arm. I yanked it out, threw everything to the floor, and carried all 17 stone of him into the house. He was having a heart attack. We called emergency services and the paramedics rushed him to a hospital about 40 miles away. One of them kept giving me that look, the one doctors aren't supposed to give when they know something's serious. My mom assumed it was just from his lifestyle. Too much alcohol, too little exercise. She never found out about the needle, and I've never told her. Story 46. This one isn't exactly a family secret, but more like something whispered outside the family. On my mother's side, she had 10 siblings, 3 sisters and 7 brothers. They grew up poor in a small town in Mexico. When my oldest uncle was around 13 or 14, sometime in the early 1970s, he ran away with 3 friends. He was eventually picked up by the police and placed in foster care until he aged out. After working for a few years, he returned home and convinced some of my other uncles to go back north with him, where they started smuggling people across the border for money. Eventually, that turned into smuggling other things, more profitable and more dangerous. They got rich quickly, but blew through their money just as fast. Almost all of my uncles became alcoholics and wasted everything. Only one, the third oldest, was smart about it. He invested in businesses and property in both Mexico and the United States. But in Arizona, he was caught with $250,000 in cash in money orders. He was deported and jailed for a year. After that, their control of the smuggling routes vanished. When he tried to get back into it, he was kidnapped, tortured, and killed just one day before my older niece's quinceañera.